Good morning. I'd like to welcome you back to day 2 for the 2013 Conference of Tlingit Tribes and Clans. This morning we're really privileged to have someone who has worked in education most of his life. I think he fished for a little while. He's a fisherman too, a fisher in his earlier days. I think it was just last year. But he is a long-time, lifelong educator, and we're really pleased to have Dennis Demmert to be speaking with us today. His topic, as you see, is traditions in transition. It couldn't be more fitting with language being the emphasis on the theme this year. So please help me welcome Dennis Demmert.
Thank you, Gary. Actually, I fished for about 20 years, and I thought that's what I'd do all my life. But an opportunity came available to go to graduate school, and after that I changed. But I miss fishing sometimes, but I really enjoyed teaching as well. You know, over the years I've heard a lot of disagreements about culture. Culture is part of what Native Studies was about when I was Director of Native Studies in Fairbanks. I want to talk about not just the study of Native cultures, but what I'll just call Native Studies, because there's more than the culture itself. The culture is such that I think students need to know about. The other aspect that needs to be covered besides that they need to know about is some of the contemporary issues and the situation that we have today. If our fellow citizens, Native and non-Native, knew more about the special status of Native people and our special relationship with the federal government, if people knew that no one else but American Indians are mentioned in the U.S. Constitution, and we have a special status and special relationship because of that. If people knew that there have been a lot of negotiations and give and take between the federal government and tribes that led to our subsistence rights and so forth, if people understood those things, we might have less problem than we have. So Native cultures, I think, need to be covered, also Native issues. And so the term I'll be using is Native Studies. Over the years, I've heard a lot of disagreement about interpretations of Native culture. And, you know, since the first contacts of Native people with Russians and Americans, there was a lot of pressure for us to adapt. Those governments were very powerful and changed a lot of ways for us. We had to adapt. There was no choice. Our ancestors had to adapt. And in the process, a lot of cultural knowledge has disappeared and diminished as well. What I intended when I proposed a session on cultures in transition was to elaborate on how cultural knowledge is diminishing and ask how we might approach the loss of cultural knowledge. I had a sense of what I was going to cover, but as I was preparing, other issues came to mind that made this evolve a bit, and I'm able to elaborate a bit more, I think. I want to start by referring to when I was teaching at the University of Alaska in Native Studies. When I went there, I found that there was not a body of knowledge to draw on. You know, if you're teaching math, English, sciences, any of those, there was a body of knowledge. There were textbooks. There was material available. You could work with those things. Native Studies, it was a blank slate. There weren't materials there to draw from. It had to be created. And that really took a lot of study and preparation. I put in more long nights than any student ever did preparing to teach courses in Fairbanks. One of the things that I found was that Native students came in with pretty limited knowledge about culture or Native issues, and they did want to learn, but they had pretty limited knowledge. Over a period of time, as I became more comfortable with the information that I had pulled together, it occurred to me several times that there probably should be more teaching, not at the college level, but before students get to college. There should be more in the schools than there is. But there was a problem that I saw. There are a number of things that kind of stood in the way of getting that done. A lot of things needed to happen. For example, a large, sound body of knowledge needed to be organized to draw from, something that other disciplines had, Native studies did not have. Another thing is school districts had to buy into the idea. They had pretty full schedules for their students. I've talked with superintendents, and well, there's no room. They've not really been encouraging on the idea of incorporating more Native studies into the programs of studies. And teachers have to buy in as well. They are key to teaching. And if we're going to have teachers, teaching materials have to be developed. These are all different things that have to happen for Native studies to become established. Teachers need to be trained. Teacher trainers need to be trained. And before they can be trained, materials have to be developed so that they can suggest structures for teachers for the teaching of Native studies. We don't think about it, but all of that is there for other disciplines, but not Native studies. It's a new area. We don't have enough of that. Very likely there are more things than those that I just listed that should come into play, but I do want to talk about those points. And by the way, as I said, it was necessary to really develop a lot of the materials that we used. As I was preparing, I went to my shelves and found 2 volumes of the papers that students had to read for one course. There's some really good material here, I think, for Native studies. They need to know something about the Constitution. There's something called the Northwest Ordinance passed by Congress in 1787 that contains a commitment that Native people and other people need to know about. And there's something called the Trade and Intercourse Act. There are Supreme Court decisions, and there's a very interesting Alaska State Court decision. There are a lot of things that they need to know. Of course, they couldn't pick these up and read them and understand. They need to have someone who knows a little bit about them. None of that has been available. I'm hoping that things are happening. It's been a while since I've taught, but even if there's been some development, I know that the preparation of Native studies materials for schools still very likely needs a lot of development. Yesterday, on my way to the conference, I was in the airport, and a former student approached me, and we talked, and she wanted to introduce me to a teacher friend of hers. The teacher friend was fairly new in Ketchikan, But one of her assignments was to teach about Native culture in Ketchikan schools, in the high school. And she had standards, the state standards for teaching about the cultures, but the standards alone didn't really give her a framework for knowing what it was that she needed to teach. She had read an article that I read many years ago, and so even though we hadn't met before, but we were in the airport, she knew that I had some background in Native studies, and she wanted to know more. I didn't have time sitting in the airport to tell her everything she needed to know, so we exchanged emails and we'll talk further. But the point is that there are now teachers who want to teach. There are teachers who want to teach, but just don't have the materials that they need to teach in the schools. There has been a lot of loss. There's been diminishment of cultural knowledge. But in fact, in the 1970s, there's really quite a revival of cultural awareness and cultural pride. There are four things that happened in the 1970s that contributed to that. The first, sequentially in time, was the passage of ANCSA, the land settlement. The settlement gave Native people funding that we never had before. We were able to do things that we couldn't do before. It gave us land, and also something else that came with it was, well, there's also a lot of influence and the understanding that we could do a lot more than we were able to do before. We had the resources to a lot more than we had before. And people could do things, and things started to develop a whole lot. We already had some legislative representation, but very soon Native representation pretty much was equal to the proportion of the Alaska Native population. We had quite a few legislators, and boy, they were pretty influential. A second event in the 1970s was in 1974, the legislature passed a law giving rural schools local control of the schools. Most of those schools are Native. They never had local control before. And before I'm through, I want to talk about local control because a lot of things have happened through local control, but there's a lot more that can happen. I understand that someone has already made comments about the local schools, local school boards, and I think that they're a tool that can be used. Two other events. The third one was the Congress passed the Indian Education Act, which provided a lot of new funds for Native education all over the United States, including Alaska. And a very important part of the provision of funds was the provision that the school districts, this went through the school districts, but the school districts had to develop the programs with the advice of parent committees. Native people had a role. A closely related fourth thing that happened in the 70s was that funding that the Bureau of Indian Affairs for Johnson O'Malley were redirected toward the education of Native students. That's how it was supposed to happen, but it really wasn't happening. There had been a report published just before that by the Center for Law and Education at Harvard that said that Johnson O'Malley funds were being misspent all over the country. And in about 1975, the Alaska State Board of Education passed the motion to stop accepting the funds and requiring the BIA to find other ways to use the funds that were coming. What they decided to do was spend it the way it was supposed to be spent starting in 1934. And so new funding from JOM went into schools. That too had parent committees. And so with these new funding, under the direction of Native parents, Native education in the schools really got started. All across the state, a high priority of parent committees was Native arts, dancing for one thing, dancing in particular, I might say. And over time, it really got started in the 1970s. Native dance got established in the schools all over. All the schools in the rural areas, at least all over Alaska, have dance. When I was in school, nothing Native was part of our curriculum. There was no such thing as learning that in schools, but it started to happen. Also, there were other Native arts that became a part of the school curriculum. By the way, these were still kind of add-ons to the day, but it was there. And students, not only Native students, but students in the schools could take traditional carving, weaving, and other Native arts in the schools. They became well established, and we can be very pleased with this development. It was a good development. I think that was good that it happened. But I think we need to look at it another way as well. It was good that it happened, but it also, I think, sets what we can use as a precedent. If we can teach Native studies, Native arts in the schools, how about other aspects of Native culture and Native issues? Why don't we get more than just the arts in the schools? And, going back to my experience at the University of Alaska, what I knew was that it took a lot of study for me to get materials like this. I knew that it really couldn't happen on a statewide basis very easily. A lot of things had to happen, and I had some sense of some of them. But as I was preparing for this conference, I start thinking more specifically, what is it that needs to happen in order to get Native studies in the schools? For one thing, we have to get a gathering of good, sound material. And at this time, what are the sources of information on Native cultures, for example? Well, I can think of three things. There are Native elders, and there are recordings. There are a lot of recordings, and a lot of recordings from many years past of Native elders. And there are books and other written materials as well. In regard to Native elders, I've gotten old enough now, I've been around long enough to come into that category. So I want to tell you a little bit about my schooling. It had to do with reading, writing, arithmetic. It had to do with those things that are normally taught in schools. And it took the best part of my learning day. It really displaced the time that I should have spent traditionally with my uncle. My uncle would have taught me what I needed to know to be an adult in Tlingit society. I hadn't realized until I went to visit him many years later how frustrated he was. He was very much in the old tradition. That I didn't come to live with him when I was a child. He didn't have a chance to teach me. Actually, I was doing a job in Craig at the time, and there were no hotels at the time, and I stayed with my uncle, and he really took advantage of the time to start teaching me what I should have been learning a long time before, and I always appreciated that. But I got a sense of how things have changed, but that was displaced. I had a teacher from Tennessee, and she didn't know anything about Alaska. That's one example. I can tell you more about that, but there's not at the time. But my peers from early on are now elders. I can tell you the experience shared by many of us. The opportunities that we should have had to learn cultural knowledge were limited. That's not to say that we don't know. There are bits of pieces. There are a lot of people my age who know something about Native knowledge. There are a lot of gaps, but collectively, the elders today have a large amount of knowledge. But you know, that large amount of knowledge that's available from elders today, I don't know that there's any mechanism or any process that has come into play to pull that together. And while our Native elders are with us, we need to somehow, how can we draw on that? I guess I'm posing that as a question. We know the situation. There's a lot of good information out there. How do we make it happen? That's one of the issues. And the other great source is those recordings. I know a lot of recordings that are kind of put away in attics, if you will. But at times I've talked with people who pull these out, and some of those recordings are in bad shape now, but there are recordings. Is there any way that that can be pulled together? Well, yes, as a matter of fact, in Fairbanks, there is a program, a man by the name of Bill Schneider, who retired about 2 years ago, was the head of a program at the library there that began collecting recordings from all over the state from Native people. And last summer I'd sent him some material. He's already retired, but he was still working on that issue. But you know, that program is not well used, but it's available. Is my time running out? Is there some way that we can start in a very planned way to pull together recordings like that, or to build further on a program that is already in play at the University of Alaska Fairbanks? That's a question I want to place before you as well. And the third source that I want to talk about is books. I remember a teacher saying once, you know, there just isn't enough material available. And that was in the 1960s when I was on the school board in Ketchikan. And about that time, Robert Kennedy had a committee, Senate committee, studying Native education. They published a little booklet on the literature on Native Americans, and that said there are more books available on Native Americans than any other group in the United States. Next were the Jewish people, I think, and black, but they're far more written. But a problem there is, out of that huge amount of material, what is useful for Native studies? And what is reliable for Native studies? You know, one of the titles in the that was cited was something called Our Feathered Friends. And I wasn't talking about birds. But that gives you an idea, you know, that there's just a great range of information, some good, some not so good. How do we sort it? From where I am standing now, I can see a couple of people who have familiarized themselves professionally with information on the Native community. And it's taught at the university. Those of us who teach there have to learn that. But we use it for our coursework. We haven't really developed it for use on a broader basis. I know a number of things. I know Steve Langdon knows a whole lot about the culture, and Rick Caulfield and others know a whole lot that we haven't developed in a way that is useful for teachers. That needs to happen somehow. One of the ideas that I thought of is perhaps the Native Education Foundations and the Alaska Heritage Institute should consider developing a proposal to bring those people together that know about these studies and not only put together good, well-sorted bibliographies, but annotated bibliographies. By annotated, I mean descriptions of what's in them, so that a teacher doesn't have to go through a 400-page book to understand something about what's in there, so that they can get more quickly to the issues that they want to find. Some material needs to be developed for teachers somehow. That's another thing that needs to happen. Can we make it happen? I'm sort of reading to you, but I'm not. I'm trying not to. The teachers do need those assessments. Native studies can't really happen in the schools without a lot of other things happening first. It's just not possible, and that's what I understood as I was thinking about this session. I was a bit frustrated when I was teaching that I knew then that it really couldn't happen in the schools because other things needed to happen first. For example, we needed to develop a sound body of knowledge about the Native community, the culture, contemporary issues, and so forth for Native studies. Besides that, the school districts had to buy in. We can have good materials, but nothing's going to happen if the school districts don't use them. And by the way, teachers have to buy in. Teachers in the union, by the way, the union's very influential. I found that out. Their role is pivotal. It's very important. We can't dump it on them. We have to somehow get them to buy in as well. How do we do that? And teaching materials need to be developed. Teachers need to be trained. Teacher trainers need to be trained. And a lot of materials. Training and materials. Those are some of the things that need to come together. It's not going to happen spontaneously, but you know there's no one that has taken this on as a project. I knew when I was teaching that it couldn't happen at the school level without all of these things that I just mentioned happening first. There has to be cooperation. Somewhere there has to be leadership to make this happen. Where's the leadership going to come from? I don't know. And that's why I'm posing that as a question to you now, a question that you might think about, Clan Conference members might think about, and I'm hoping that the panel members will have some ideas on that as well. What I've discussed with you is kind of a work in progress. I haven't fully developed the ideas that I wanted to suggest, but what I've also found is that ideas are best when other people get involved in filling them out. And so I'm hoping that members of the Clan Conference today will think about the need to get Native studies in the schools. And I'm hoping that the Clan Conference members will think about those things that need to happen to get Native studies in the schools. And by the way, the rural school districts, I think, are the key to getting them in schools. We have Native people on the school boards in rural areas, and I think they would be open. I don't know that it's been, but you know, we'd have to have the material for them to work with. But the rural schools can set the model that could be picked up by larger schools as well, but it can happen there. But how do we get these things going? Is that worth thinking about? Is that worth discussing? Is that worth getting into play somehow? those are the thoughts that I wanted to leave you with today. It's an unfinished project that isn't really a project yet, but who can make it a project? How can we make it happen? How can we get Native studies into the schools? If we don't get it into the schools, the diminishment that we've been seeing for a long time will just continue the way it is. I'd hate to see it come to a point of disappearance. And I'd hate to see what is taught become something very sterile, something about Native people and so forth, but something that's alive and vital and really represents our culture. I hope it can happen, and I hope that you all think about how we can get that done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. There's a lot to think about. Well, my name is Jim Simard. I'm the head librarian at the Alaska State Library, which is a very old institution. The first person who had my job was A.P. Kashivarov, the Orthodox priest who was the head of the Orthodox community here in Juneau. Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, Jim, I just wanted to bring Victoria up here to make a real quick announcement about voting. Since we fought for the right to vote, we're going to vote for some children during the Clan Conference. Victoria is been loaned to us by Click and Haida Central Council. Gold Belt. I'm sorry, Gold Belt. Thank you for the correction, because Gold Belt has been a real strong supporter. She is our volunteer coordinator, so I apologize for the brief interruption, but we wanted to make sure we got this announcement.
Ganesh Chish, the students were, there was a contest that was announced out last month in regards to this Clan Conference. And so we had the students put out flyers for a poster contest called Endangered Language Poster Contest. And so the students that participated, we will have their work displayed out on the hall by the t-shirts. We hope that you will take time to see what they have created and vote on those items on their work. And I'll have the instructions and so forth there as well. So Ganesh again for your participation. This was a way for me to help our youth be aware of some of the issues that our elders and myself are struggling with, which is to keep our language alive. So Ganesh, thank you again for your participation in helping. The students will be recognized during the end of the month for the Native American Heritage Month, and they will receive prizes. So again, thank you for your participation.